Lorenzo Raldi stared at the photograph on Enrico Rossi's desk, his jaw clenching so hard he thought his teeth might crack. The woman in the picture had soft curves that spilled over the edges of what society deemed acceptable. Dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, and eyes that looked tired, defeated, even. Exactly what Enrico wanted. "This is your idea of entertainment." Lorenzo's voice was ice. Enrico's laugh grated against his nerves like broken glass.
Come no.
"You've built your reputation on perfection, perfect suits, perfect cars, perfect women on your arm at every gala. Let's see if that pride of yours can survive marrying someone like her." Lorenzo's fingers twitched toward the gun at his waist, but he forced them still. The waterfront properties flickered through his mind. Prime real estate, would that cripple Enrico's operation and cement Lorenzo's control over New York's harbor? Worth millions worth.
Swallowing his pride.
1 month, Lorenzo said, his voice deadly calm. "Any woman who meets your definition of undesirable. Legal marriage, public appearances. When I win, the waterfront is mine. And when you fail," Enrico leaned back in his leather chair, "I get your casino development."
All of it.
Lorenzo extended his hand, sealing the devil's bargain with a handshake that felt like a noose tightening around his neck. As he left Enrico's office, one thought burned through his mind. She's a pawn. A means to an island. Marry her, win the bet, and forget she ever existed. Ever made a decision you thought was calculated, only to realize it would change everything? Drop a comment, where are you watching from tonight? The city lights of Manhattan glittered below as Lorenzo stood in his penthouse office, reviewing the dossier his men had compiled. 3 candidates. 3 women who fit Enrico's cruel parameters. But only one made strategic sense. Isabelle Costa. Marco, his right-hand man, tapped the file. 32. Runs a failing bakery in Brooklyn. Mother's in hospice with stage 4 cancer. Drowning in medical debt. He paused.
She's exactly what Rossi specified.
Plus size, no social presence, keeps to herself. Lorenzo studied the surveillance photos. Isabelle emerging from her bakery at dawn, flour dusting her generous curves. Isabelle at her mother's bedside, exhaustion carved into every line of her face. Isabelle alone in her small apartment above the shop, surrounded by bills she couldn't pay. Vulnerable, Lorenzo said. Desperate. Perfect, Marco agreed. Lorenzo felt something twist in his chest, something that might have been guilt if he'd allowed himself to feel such things. He
crushed it down.
In his world, sentiment was suicide. Enrico had made this personal, had attacked his pride, his image. This woman was collateral damage in a war she didn't even know existed. Set up the meeting, Lorenzo ordered. Tonight.
Late.
When she's closing. Marco nodded and left. Lorenzo poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey, watching the amber liquid catch the light. His reflection in the window looked back at him, cold, calculating, powerful. Everything he'd built himself into after clawing his way out of poverty and violence. Don Valentino would tell me this is beneath me, he thought, remembering his mentor's voice. But Don Valentino is dead, and I'm still here. He drained the glass and reached for his coat. Time to make an offer she couldn't refuse. The bell above the bakery door chimed as Lorenzo stepped inside, and the scent hit him like a physical force: vanilla, cinnamon, brown sugar, yeast. Warmth, the kind of warmth that had been absent from his life for so long he'd forgotten it existed. We're closed, a voice called from the back. I'm not here for bread. Isabelle emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Flour dusted her dark hair, her round cheeks, the swell of her breasts where the apron tied across her body. She was bigger than the photos suggested curves that society would judge, but that Lorenzo found himself noticing in a way that surprised him, not with disgust, as he'd expected, but with a strange, unwelcome awareness. She stopped when she saw him, her dark eyes widening slightly. Recognition flickered across her face, not of him personally, but of the type of man he was. Expensive.
Suit dangerous energy.
The kind of man who brought trouble through doors like hers. Then I can't help you, she said, her voice steady despite the wariness in her posture. Lorenzo moved deeper into the small shop, his polished shoes clicking against worn linoleum. The space was cramped, outdated, but immaculately clean. Display cases sat mostly empty. She'd sold almost nothing today. A calculator on the counter showed numbers that told a story of desperation. "I think you can, Miss Costa." He watched her stiffen at the use of her name.
"I have a business proposition for you."
"I don't know you." Isabelle's hands gripped the edge of the counter. "And I don't do business with men who walk into my shop after hours knowing my name."
Lorenzo Raldi.
He offered no handshake, no false pleasantries. "And you're going to want to hear what I have to offer." Something flickered in her eyes, fear, curiosity, calculation.
She was smarter than her situation suggested.
Good. This would be easier if she understood the game. "I'm listening," she said finally. Lorenzo named a sum that made her breath catch. He watched the number hit her like a punch, watched her try to hide her reaction and fail.
"In exchange for what?"
Her voice had gone quiet, careful. "Marriage." The word hung between them like a knife.
1 month, maybe 2.
A legal ceremony, some public appearances. Then a quiet divorce and you walk away with enough money to save your mother, your business, and your future. Isabelle's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Marriage. To you. A complete stranger who looks at me like I'm a problem he needs to solve." She shook her head.
"What's the catch?"
"No catch." Lorenzo's voice was smooth, controlled. "Just a mutually beneficial arrangement. You need money. I need a wife. Temporarily."
"Why me?" The question cut through his rehearsed pitch.
Lorenzo had prepared for this.
"You fit certain requirements."
"You're intelligent enough to understand discretion. Independent enough not to form attachments."
"And?"
He gestured vaguely at her body, letting the insult hover unspoken. Isabelle's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she held his gaze with a strength that surprised him. "You need someone who won't elevate your image. Someone your associates will whisper about. Someone who makes the great Lorenzo Raldi look like he's lost his mind." She was sharper than he'd expected. Much sharper, like that, he admitted. Isabelle was quiet for a long moment, her fingers fidgeting with the tie of her apron. Lorenzo watched her calculate, watched her weigh her dignity against her desperation. He'd seen it before, the moment when survival instinct won over pride. "Everything in writing," she said finally. "Terms, conditions, payment schedule. I want a lawyer to review it before I sign anything."
"Of course."
Lorenzo pulled out his phone. "I'll have the contracts drawn up tonight. We can meet tomorrow to finalize."
"One more thing."
Isabelle's voice hardened. "Whatever game you're playing, whatever reason you really need this marriage, I don't want to know. I'll play my part, I'll smile for your cameras, I'll be whatever you need me to be in public. But don't expect me to pretend this is anything other than what it is, a transaction." Lorenzo found himself almost respecting her for that.
"Almost."
"Agreed," he said.
"This is business.
Nothing more." As he turned to leave, Isabelle's voice stopped him.
"Mr. Raldi,
the real question isn't why you chose me. It's what happens when you realize I'm not as easy to control as you think." Lorenzo looked back at her, standing in her shabby bakery with flour in her hair and fire in her eyes, and felt the first whisper of doubt. He crushed it immediately.
"She's a pawn.
That's all she'll ever be." But as he stepped out into the cold New York night, the scent of vanilla and cinnamon clung to his clothes, and he couldn't quite shake the memory of her steady gaze. The New York City Marriage Bureau building loomed gray and bureaucratic against an overcast sky. Lorenzo adjusted his tie Armani, perfectly knotted, and glanced at the woman standing beside him, Isabelle. Wore a cream-colored dress that his stylist had chosen, something simple but elegant that actually fit her curves rather than trying to hide them. Her dark hair was styled in soft waves, and someone had done her makeup. She looked not transformed, but more herself somehow. It irritated him that he noticed.
"Ready?"
he asked, his voice flat.
"As I'll ever be."
Isabelle's hands were clasped tightly in front of her, the only sign of her nerves. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. The clerk barely looked up as they approached, shuffling papers with the enthusiasm of someone who'd processed 1,000 marriages and expected to process 1,000 more. Marco and Dante flanked them as witnesses, two of Lorenzo's most trusted men, their dark suits and watchful eyes making the small room feel even more oppressive. Isabelle had no one. No family, no friends. She stood alone on her side of the invisible line, and something about that made Lorenzo's jaw tighten with an emotion he refused to name. Names, the clerk droned. Lorenzo Michael Raldi. Isabelle Marie Costa. The officiant began the ceremony with all the warmth of reading a grocery list. Lorenzo watched Isabelle's profile as the words washed over them: standard vows, legal obligations, the binding of two lives into one. Her face was calm, composed, but he saw the slight tremor in her hands when the officiant mentioned love, honor, and cherish. "Do you, Lorenzo Michael Raldi, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?"
I do.
The words tasted like ash. "Do you, Isabelle Marie Costa, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Isabelle's pause lasted only a heartbeat, but Lorenzo felt it stretch. "Then, I do." Lorenzo slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band, nothing ostentatious. Her hands were smaller than he'd expected, softer. When she placed his ring, her fingers trembled slightly against his skin. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Lorenzo saw something there that looked like resignation mixed with defiance. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The officiant waited.
Lorenzo didn't move.
He told himself he wouldn't play pretend when no one important was watching. The moment stretched awkwardly until the officiant cleared his throat and moved on. "Congratulations," the man said without conviction, already reaching for the next couple's paperwork. Outside, rain had started to fall, cold, relentless. Lorenzo's driver pulled up immediately, and they slid into the back of the black SUV in silence. Isabelle stared out the window as they drove through Manhattan, heading toward Lorenzo's estate in the Hamptons. He watched her reflection in the glass, trying to read her thoughts and finding nothing but careful blankness. "You'll have your own wing," he said finally, breaking the silence.
Your own space.
"The staff has been informed of our arrangement." "How considerate." Isabelle's voice was dry. "I'm not a monster, Mrs. Raldi." She turned to look at him then, really look at him. "Aren't you? Married a stranger for money and power. You'll parade me around for a few weeks, let your friends mock you for marrying someone like me, and then discard me when I've served my purpose." Her dark eyes were steady, unflinching. "That sounds pretty monstrous to me." Lorenzo felt anger flash through him, hot and defensive.
"You agreed to this."
"You took the money." "I did," Isabelle agreed.
Which makes me complicit in my own humiliation.
"But at least I'm honest about what this is." The rest of the drive passed in hostile silence. When they finally turned through the iron gates of his estate, Lorenzo watched Isabelle's face for a reaction. The mansion sprawled across manicured grounds, 3 stories of steel and glass, modern architecture that spoke of wealth and power. Most women gasped or exclaimed. Isabelle just studied it with the same careful assessment she'd given everything else. "It's very..." She paused, searching for words. Lorenzo's driver coughed, trying to hide a laugh. Lorenzo shot him a glare that could have peeled paint. Inside, their footsteps echoed on imported marble. Everything gleamed: crystal chandeliers, polished wood, abstract art that cost more than most people's houses. Lorenzo had designed it all himself, creating a space that reflected his power and success. "Your room is on the 2nd floor, East Wing," Lorenzo said, already loosening his tie.
He needed space, needed to think.
This woman unsettled him in ways he hadn't anticipated. "Maria, the housekeeper, will show you around tomorrow."
The kitchen is stocked.
"Help yourself to whatever you need."
And your room?
Isabelle asked.
3rd floor.
"We won't be running into each other much." He pulled out his phone, already scrolling through messages that had accumulated during the ceremony.
Business didn't stop for uncomfortable weddings.
"My office and the 3rd floor are off limits."
Everything else is fair game.
He turned toward his study without waiting for a response, dismissing her. Behind him, he heard Isabelle's soft exhale, disappointment or relief. He couldn't tell.
Lorenzo?
Her voice stopped him. He looked back. She stood in the massive foyer, small overnight bag in hand, looking lost in the cavernous space.
Thank you.
She said quietly.
For the money.
For my mother. Whatever else this is. Thank you for that. Lorenzo felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest.
He nodded once, curtly, and disappeared into his study, closing the door on her gratitude and the strange ache it created. Isabelle stood in the center of her new bedroom and felt the loneliness press against her like a physical weight. The room was beautiful king-sized bed with silk sheets, an en-suite bathroom with a soaking tub, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the moonlit grounds. It was also utterly impersonal, like a luxury hotel room that thousands of people had passed through without leaving a trace. She set her bag on the bed, everything she'd brought fit in one small duffel, and moved to the window. The grounds stretched endlessly, dotted with security lights and shadowy figures of guards patrolling the perimeter.
This wasn't a home. It was a fortress. Her phone buzzed.
A text from the hospice nurse. Your mother had a good day.
She asked about you.
Isabelle typed back. Tell her I'm fine.
I'll visit tomorrow.
She couldn't tell her mother the truth. Couldn't explain that she'd sold herself into a temporary marriage with a man who looked at her like she was a problem to be managed. Her mother, weak and fading, believed Isabelle had finally found love. It was easier to let her believe the lie. Isabelle unpacked her meager belongings, then ventured out to explore. The mansion was a maze of rooms that no one seemed to use, formal living rooms with furniture that looked like it had never been sat on, a dining room that could seat 20 but probably never had. Everything was perfect and empty and cold. She found the kitchen eventually, all stainless steel and granite, industrial and pristine. The refrigerator was indeed stocked, but with ingredients she barely recognized.
Fancy cheeses, imported olives, champagne.
Nothing like the simple staples of her Brooklyn apartment. Isabelle made herself tea, at least she could find that, and continued her exploration.
A home gym, a wine cellar, a screening room.
Each space more impersonal than the last, until she found the library. The double doors opened onto a 2-story room lined with books. Real books, leather-bound and well-kept, climbing toward a coffered ceiling. A rolling ladder provided access to the highest shelves, and deep leather armchairs invited reading. This room at least felt lived in. Isabelle ran her fingers along the spines, recognizing titles. Classics, mostly Austen, Dickens, Tolstoy, but also contemporary fiction, biographies, histories. Someone had curated this collection with care, with genuine love for literature. She pulled out a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, one of her favorites, and was surprised to find margin notes in neat handwriting. Observations, questions, arguments with the text. She flipped to the title page and saw the name written there, Lorenzo Raldi.
So the cold mafia boss read romance novels and made notes in the margins.
The discovery was so unexpected, so human, that Isabelle felt something in her chest soften slightly. She curled up in one of the leather chairs, losing herself in Austen's familiar words. For a little while she could pretend she was back in her small apartment, surrounded by her own beloved books, free from the cage of obligation and pretense. The sound of a car engine cutting through the night jerked her back to reality. Voices drifted up from below, Lorenzo returning from whatever dark business occupied his evenings. Isabelle heard him speaking in rapid Italian, his tone sharp with authority. Then footsteps coming closer. She should leave. Should retreat to her room and avoid any awkward encounters. But something kept her frozen in place as the library door opened and Lorenzo appeared. He'd shed his jacket and tie, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. There was tension in his shoulders, exhaustion around his eyes. When he saw her, he stopped short.
You found the library.
It wasn't a question.
I hope that's okay.
Isabelle held up the book.
I needed something familiar.
Lorenzo's gaze dropped to the Austen novel, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, maybe embarrassment.
Help yourself.
Just stay away from the locked cabinet in the corner. Isabelle glanced at the cabinet. He indicated dark wood with a heavy padlock.
She didn't need to ask what was inside.
Ledgers, records, documentation of all the illegal activities that funded this fortress of a mansion.
I understand, she said quietly. I know what you are. What you do. I won't interfere.
Lorenzo studied her, his dark eyes unreadable in the dim light. He moved closer, and Isabelle caught the scent of his cologne mixed with something else, gunpowder, maybe, or just the sharp edge of danger that seemed to cling to him.
Do you? His voice was low, almost intimate. And yet you agreed to marry me.
We all make choices to survive. Isabelle met his gaze steadily, refusing to show the nervousness fluttering in her stomach.
Lorenzo's jaw tightened.
He reached out, and for a moment Isabelle thought he might touch her. Instead, he plucked the book from her hands, his fingers brushing hers. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her.
You read this?
He asked, flipping through the annotated pages.
Many times. And what do you think of Mr. Darcy?
There was a challenge in his voice, like he was testing her. I think he's a man who mistakes pride for strength, Isabelle said carefully.
Who has to learn that vulnerability isn't weakness?
Lorenzo's eyes met hers, and the air between them suddenly felt charged, dangerous. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the shadow of stubble on his jaw.
Careful, Mrs. Raldi, he said softly.
You're starting to sound like you think people can change.
Can't they? In my experience?
Lorenzo handed the book back to her, but his hand lingered on hers for a moment too long.
No. People are what they are.
They just get better at hiding it. He stepped back, breaking whatever spell had woven itself between them.
Good night, Isabelle.
It was the first time he'd used her first name. The sound of it in his deep voice did something strange to her pulse.
Good night, Lorenzo.
She watched him leave, the book still warm from his touch in her hands. Through the window, the sky was beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Isabelle had survived her first night as Mrs. Raldi.
She just wasn't sure if she'd survive what came.
Stand still, the stylist commanded, adjusting the deep green gown for the third time. Isabelle stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom, barely recognizing herself. The dress was stunning emerald silk that hugged her curves before flowing to the floor. The stylist had cinched it at the waist, emphasizing her hourglass figure rather than trying to hide it. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant twist, and the makeup artist had done something magical with her eyes.
She looked beautiful.
She also looked terrified.
Perfect, the stylist pronounced, stepping back.
Mr. Raldi won't know what hit him. Mr. Raldi couldn't care less, Isabelle thought, but she smiled and thanked the woman anyway. The charity gala was being held at the Plaza Hotel, one of Manhattan's most prestigious venues. Lorenzo had briefed her that morning with all the warmth of a military general preparing for battle. Smile, don't talk too much, stay by his side. They needed to be seen together, needed to sell the legitimacy of their sudden marriage to his associates and rivals. What he didn't say, but what Isabelle understood perfectly, was that she was expected to endure their judgment.
To be the source of whispers and speculation.
To make Lorenzo Raldi look like a man who'd lost his mind. The town car arrived precisely at 7. Lorenzo was waiting in the foyer, and when he saw her descending the stairs, something flickered in his eyes.
Surprise, maybe. Or appreciation.
It vanished so quickly Isabelle wondered if she'd imagined it. You look acceptable, he said stiffly. Acceptable. The word stung more than it should have. Thank you, Isabelle replied, keeping her voice neutral.
You look acceptable too.
Lorenzo's lips twitched almost a smile, but not quite. He offered his arm with the mechanical courtesy of a stranger helping her cross the street. Isabelle took it, feeling the solid muscle beneath the expensive fabric of his tuxedo. The drive into Manhattan was silent. Isabelle watched the city lights blur past, feeling like she was heading toward an execution. Lorenzo scrolled through his phone, his jaw tight with whatever stress he was managing. They existed in separate bubbles, connected only by the fragile fiction of their marriage. The plaza's ballroom glittered with wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over men in tuxedos and women in designer gowns. Champagne flowed freely, conversation hummed, and every eye turned when Lorenzo Raldi entered with his new wife. The whispers started immediately. Isabelle felt them like needles against her skin. Women clutching their champagne glasses tighter, their eyes raking over her figure with barely concealed disdain. Men exchanging confused glances, trying to understand what Lorenzo was playing at. The judgment was palpable, suffocating. "Smile," Lorenzo murmured near her ear, his hand finding the small of her back. To anyone watching, it looked possessive, intimate. To Isabelle, it felt like a brand marking her as his property. They made their way through the crowd, Lorenzo greeting associates with his characteristic authority. Isabelle played her part, smiled politely, said little, let Lorenzo dominate conversations while she stood decoratively at his side. She'd researched proper etiquette, studied how to navigate these social minefields. But research couldn't prepare her for the reality of being dissected by a room full of people who'd already decided she didn't belong.
"Lorenzo!"
A booming voice cut through the chatter. Enrico Rossi approached, a blonde woman half his age draped on his arm. His eyes gleamed with malicious amusement as he took in Isabelle. "And this must be the new Mrs. Raldi."
How?
Lorenzo's hand tightened imperceptibly on Isabelle's back.
"Enrico, still trafficking in models, I see."
Enrico laughed, but his eyes stayed fixed on Isabelle. "We all have our types, don't we?" The insult was barely veiled. "Though I must say yours has certainly evolved." "Changed, not evolved," the blonde interjected, her voice saccharine sweet. "Isn't that right, Mr. Raldi?"
"Trading up for someone more substantial?"
The nearby conversations died. People leaned in, eager for the confrontation. Isabelle felt her cheeks burn, felt the humiliation wrap around her throat like a noose. This was the moment she was supposed to shrink, to confirm their low expectations. Instead, something her father had once told her surfaced in her mind. "Never let them see you break, Principessa. Pride is the only armor that never fails." Isabelle smiled a real smile, warm and genuine, and extended her hand to the blonde. "Isabelle Raldi. And you must be this season's model. I do hope Enrico remembers your name longer than he remembered the last three." The blonde's face flushed red. Enrico's smirk faltered. Around them, someone choked on their champagne. Isabelle turned to Enrico, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. "As for substantial, yes, I suppose I am. Unlike the interchangeable decorations you prefer, I have things like thoughts, opinions, and a personality. Terribly inconvenient, I know, but my husband seems to appreciate the challenge." She felt Lorenzo's hand still on her back, felt the tension in his body shift into something else. When she glanced at him, his eyes were bright with what looked almost like pride. "If you'll excuse us," Lorenzo said smoothly, guiding Isabelle away. "My wife and I have better company to keep." As they moved through the crowd, Isabelle felt eyes following them, but the quality of the stares had changed. There was still judgment, still curiosity, but now there was also grudging respect. She'd shown teeth, and in this world of predators, that mattered. "That was," Lorenzo began once they'd reached a quieter corner of the ballroom.
"Stupid,"
Isabelle supplied.
"Reckless,
"Magnificent." The word came out rough, surprised. Lorenzo looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time.
Where did that come from?"
Isabelle accepted a champagne flute from a passing waiter, her hand steadier than she felt. "You're not the only one who knows how to survive in a hostile environment, Mr. Raldi. I've just had different battlefields." Lorenzo's dark eyes studied her face, searching for something. The air between them felt different, suddenly charged with a new awareness, a new possibility. "Dance with me," he said.
It wasn't a request. "Why?"
"Because they're watching. Because we're supposed to be married."
"Because..."
He paused, something unreadable crossing his face. "Because I want to." Isabelle let him lead her to the dance floor, his hand finding hers, his other hand settling on her waist. They moved together to the slow melody, and Isabelle was acutely aware of every point of contact between them, the heat of his palm through silk, the solid strength of his shoulder under her hand. "Thank you," Lorenzo said quietly, his breath warm against her temple. "For handling Enrico." "I didn't do it for you," Isabelle replied honestly. "I did it for me. I'm tired of being treated like I'm less than human just because I don't fit their narrow definition of acceptable." Lorenzo was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice held a note of something that might have been regret. "You're stronger than I thought you'd be." "You mean stronger than you hoped I'd be," Isabelle corrected. "You wanted someone meek and controllable. Someone who would make you look foolish."
Sorry to disappoint. You're not a disappointment.
The words came out with unexpected intensity. Lorenzo's hand tightened on her waist, pulling her infinitesimally closer. "You're—" Isabelle looked up at him, at the strong line of his jaw, the intelligence in his dark eyes, the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide. In that moment, with his arms around her and music swelling around them, she felt the first dangerous crack in her armor.
Don't, she told herself, don't. Start caring about him. That is temporary, that
isn't real. But her traitorous heart didn't seem to be listening. 2A. The mansion was silent except for the soft sounds of Isabelle working in the kitchen she'd given up on sleep hours ago, her mind too full of the gala, of Lorenzo's hand on her waist, of the way he'd looked at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. Baking was her therapy, her meditation. The familiar rhythm soothed her, measuring flour, creaming butter and sugar, the alchemy of turning simple ingredients into something that brought comfort. She was making a chocolate cake, nothing fancy, just the recipe her grandmother had taught her when she was a girl. The kitchen filled with the scent of cocoa and vanilla as the cake baked. Isabelle sat at the island, waiting, when she heard footsteps on the marble floor. Lorenzo appeared in the doorway, barefoot, wearing only dark pajama pants and a white t-shirt. His hair was disheveled, and there was something vulnerable about seeing him so informal, so human. His eyes found the oven, then her. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Apparently neither can you." Lorenzo moved into the kitchen, drawn by the scent.
What are you making? Chocolate cake. My grandmother's recipe.
Isabelle gestured to the island. "Want to wait with me?" "It'll be done in 10 minutes. She expected him to refuse, to retreat to whatever dark corner of the mansion he'd emerged from. Instead, Lorenzo slid onto one of the bar stools across from her. "I haven't had homemade cake in—" He trailed off, calculating. 20 years, maybe." "That's criminal," Isabelle said. She studied his face in the soft kitchen light, noting the shadows under his eyes, the tension that never quite left his shoulders. "Can't you buy whatever you want?" "Money can't buy everything." Lorenzo's voice was quiet, introspective. "Some things you lose, and no amount of power brings them back." The timer chimed. Isabelle pulled the cake from the oven, the top perfectly domed and cracked. She let it cool for a few minutes, then cut 2 generous slices, plating them with more care than necessary. Lorenzo took a bite, and something in his expression shifted, softened. "This is
good?"
"This is home." The words seemed to surprise him. He took another bite, and Isabelle watched emotions flicker across his face: nostalgia, loss, something that looked like grief.
"Tell me about your home," Isabelle said gently.
"Before all this." She gestured vaguely at the mansion, meaning his empire, his power, his carefully constructed life. Lorenzo was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then there was no home." "Not really. My father was a drunk who gambled away everything we had. My mother left when I was 6, just disappeared one day. I don't even remember what she looked like." Isabelle's heart clenched. She said nothing, just listened. "By the time I was 10, I was stealing to eat," Lorenzo continued, his voice flat, reciting facts rather than memories. "Picking pockets, shoplifting. I got good at it."
"Had to."
He pushed cake crumbs around his plate. "Don Valentino caught me trying to steal from his restaurant. I was terrified he'd kill me." Instead, he brought me inside, fed me, asked about my family.
And then?
Isabelle prompted.
And then my father disappeared.
Just gone. No body, no explanation. I went to live with Don Valentino.
Lorenzo met her eyes.
He saved my life, gave me purpose, taught me how to survive.
How to be strong. And what did you have to give up in return?
Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Everything soft, everything weak. He taught me that sentiment gets you killed, that trust is a luxury we can't afford. Isabelle reached across the island, her hand covering his before she could think better of it. Lorenzo stared at their joined hands like he didn't quite understand what was happening. Don Valentino was wrong, she said quietly.
Strength isn't about hardness.
It's about knowing when to bend so you don't break.
Spoken like someone who's never had to kill to survive.
No, Isabelle agreed.
But I've had to survive in other ways. I know what it's like to feel powerless, to make choices that compromise who you want to be. She squeezed his hand gently. We're not so different, you and I. Lorenzo pulled his hand away abruptly, standing. Don't do that. Do what? Pretend there's something between us beyond the contract. His voice had gone cold again, defensive. This isn't a romance, Isabelle. I'm not some damaged hero you can fix with kindness and chocolate cake.
I know that.
Isabelle stood too, meeting his sudden anger with calm.
I'm not trying to fix you, Lorenzo. I'm just trying to understand you.
Why?
The word came out raw, almost desperate.
Because you're my husband.
The simple statement hung between them. Even if it's temporary, even if it's just paper, you're my husband, and continue 8:39 p.m. I can't spend every day living with a stranger. Lorenzo stared at her, his chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. The kitchen felt too small suddenly, too intimate. The space between them crackled with unspoken things, dangerous things. You should go to bed, he said finally, his voice rough. Isabelle nodded, turning to clean up the plates. But Lorenzo's voice stopped her. Isabelle. She looked back.
Thank you.
For the cake.
For...
He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish. You're welcome, she said softly. As she left the kitchen, Isabelle felt his eyes on her back. And for the first time since this arrangement began, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was something real buried beneath all the contracts and pretense. Something that scared her more than anything else that had happened so far. Ever started hating someone, then realized you were falling for them? Drop a like if you've been there. Isabelle woke to the sound of breaking glass and gunfire for a disorienting moment. She thought she was dreaming some nightmare dredged up from childhood memories of her father's world then. Another gunshot cracked through the night, closer this time, and terror flooded her system. She rolled out of bed, her mind racing. The mansion's alarm was blaring, red emergency lights pulsing through her windows. Shouts echoed from somewhere below, Lorenzo's men engaging with intruders. This is real. This is happening. Isabelle grabbed her robe, her hands shaking. She should stay in her room, should lock the door and hide like any sensible person would. But the memory of Lorenzo's face in the kitchen, the vulnerability he'd shown her, propelled her forward. She opened her door carefully, peering into the hallway. More gunshots, the sound of running feet. A man she didn't recognize appeared at the end of the corridor, gun raised. His eyes locked on her, and Isabelle's blood turned to ice. Found her, he shouted to someone behind him. Isabelle slammed her door and locked it, her heart thundering. Found her? They were looking for her specifically. This wasn't a random attack, this was targeted. The door shuddered under a heavy blow. Then another. Wood splintered. Isabelle looked around desperately for a weapon, for an escape route. Nothing.
She was trapped. The door burst open.
2 men entered, both armed. Isabelle backed toward the window, her mind screaming at her to think, to do something. Easy, Mrs. Raldi, one of them said, his voice mock soothing.
We're just here to deliver a message.
3 gunshots rang out in rapid succession. Both men crumpled to the floor. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, gun still raised, his face a mask of cold fury. Blood soaked through his white shirt. He was injured, but standing, moving.
Are you hurt? His eyes raked over her, checking for wounds. No, I'm Lorenzo, you're bleeding. Move. No.
He grabbed her hand, pulling her over the bodies and into the hallway. More gunfire erupted from below. The house had turned into a war zone. They ran through the mansion's corridors, Lorenzo navigating with lethal precision despite his injury. Isabelle could see blood spreading across his shirt, dripping from a gash on his arm. He needed medical attention, needed to stop and rest, but he kept moving with single-minded determination. They reached his office. Lorenzo slammed the door behind them, locking it. His hands moved across the bookshelf with practiced speed, triggering some hidden mechanism. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a reinforced panic room. "Get in," Lorenzo ordered, pushing her toward the opening.
Not without you.
"Isabelle, I said not without you." She grabbed his uninjured arm, tugging him toward the panic room.
You're bleeding out.
"If you think I'm going to hide while you collapse out here, you're insane."
Another explosion rocked the mansion.
The floor trembled beneath their feet. Lorenzo's face tightened with pain and frustration, but he followed her into the panic room. The door sealed behind them with a heavy thunk. The space was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with a cot, emergency supplies, and communication equipment. Lorenzo sagged against the wall, his face pale. The adrenaline that had kept him moving was clearly fading. "First aid kit," Isabelle said, her voice steadier than she felt.
Where?
Lorenzo gestured weakly to a cabinet. Isabelle grabbed it, her hands moving with automatic efficiency. She'd done this before, not often, but enough. Enough to know how to handle trauma, how to keep someone alive when death was waiting in the wings. "Shirt off," she commanded. Lorenzo looked at her through half-lidded eyes.
Bossy. Bleeding.
"Shirt off."
No.
He struggled out of the shirt, revealing a muscled torso marked with old scars and fresh wounds. A bullet had grazed his side, not deep enough to be fatal, but deep enough to need stitches. The gash on his arm was worse, jagged and bleeding freely. Isabelle cleaned both wounds with steady hands, her face set in concentration. Lorenzo watched her work, something shifting in his expression.
Where did you learn this?
He asked, echoing the question from their first night.
Does it matter?
Isabelle threaded a needle with practiced ease.
Yes. She paused, meeting his eyes.
Outside, the sounds of fighting continued, muffled through the reinforced walls, but present.
They might die tonight.
Secrets seemed pointless in the face of that reality. "My father," she said quietly, beginning to stitch. "He was connected. Men came to our house sometimes, after jobs. Bleeding, broken.
My mother would patch them up.
Each stitch went in cleanly, evenly. I learned by watching, by helping when I was old enough."
Lorenzo's eyes narrowed, studying her face. Your father, what was his name? Does it matter?
Isabelle repeated, tying off a stitch.
Yes.
She moved to his arm, cleaning the deeper wound. Costa was my mother's maiden name.
My stepfather's name. Another stitch.
My father died when I was 12.
Isabelle. Lorenzo's voice had gone dangerous.
What was your father's name? Their eyes met. In that small, sealed room with death waiting outside, Isabelle made a choice. Valentino, she whispered. Don Marco Valentino.
Lorenzo's entire body went rigid.
The color drained from his face. That's not possible. Don Valentino had no children. He had one. Isabelle's hands never stopped working, finishing the last stitch on his arm.
Me?
He kept me hidden, protected. Told everyone I died with my mother in a car accident when I was 12. She began wrapping his wounds with gauze.
I've been hiding for 15 years.
Living under my mother's name, pretending to be someone I'm not.
You're Don Valentino's daughter.
Lorenzo grabbed her wrist, his grip tight despite his injuries. The entire time you knew who I was. What I was to him.
Yes.
You played me. His voice was raw with betrayal, and something else hurt, maybe. This whole thing, the marriage, the helpless act, you've been manipulating me from the beginning. I needed protection, Isabelle said quietly. My stepfather has been trying to control my life to use me. There are people who would kill me if they knew who I really am. When you walked into my bakery offering me a way into your world, into his world. She trailed off. I took it. Lorenzo released her wrist, his head falling back against the wall.
Cristo.
Don Valentino's daughter. I never meant to hurt you, Isabelle said. I just wanted to survive.
Like I did. Lorenzo's laugh was bitter.
We're both survivors, are we?
Both playing games, both using each other.
Yes.
The communication system crackled to life. Marco's voice came through, tinged with relief.
Boss? You there?
Lorenzo reached for the radio.
I'm here.
Status?
We pushed them back.
The house is secure.
It was Rossi's men. They got bad intel about the panic room location, kept searching the wrong wing.
A pause. Sir, they were specifically looking for your wife.
Kept shouting about the Valentino girl.
Lorenzo's eyes snapped to Isabelle's face.
How many did we lose?
3 dead, 5 injured. But we got most of theirs. Sent a clear message.
Good. Secure the perimeter. I'll be out in 20. Lorenzo set down the radio, his gaze never leaving Isabelle.
They know who you are.
I don't understand how Enrico must have dug deeper after the gala. Maybe one of Don Valentino's old enemies recognized something in you. Lorenzo struggled to his feet, wincing. This changes everything.
I'm sorry, Isabelle whispered. I should have told you sooner.
Lorenzo cupped her face with his bandaged hand, forcing her to meet his eyes.
You saved my life tonight.
Again.
His thumb brushed her cheek. Don Valentino's daughter, hiding in plain sight. Teaching me about strength and vulnerability while stitching up my wounds.
Lorenzo, he kissed her.
Not the careful, controlled kiss of their first time, but something desperate and claiming. Isabelle melted into it, her hands fisting in his ruined shirt, tasting blood and adrenaline and something that felt dangerously like love. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. You're mine, he said fiercely. Don Valentino's daughter or not, contract or not, you're mine, Isabelle.
And I protect what's mine.
Isabelle felt tears prick her eyes.
This wasn't supposed to happen.
We weren't supposed to, I know.
Lorenzo's voice was rough with emotion.
But it did.
And now we deal with it. Outside the panic room, the mansion lay in ruins. But inside, something new was being born, something real and terrifying and impossible to deny. Dawn light filtered through Lorenzo's office windows, illuminating the destruction from the night's attack. Broken glass crunched under his feet as he surveyed the damage, his mind working through the implications of what he'd learned.
Isabelle Valentino.
Don Marco Valentino's daughter. The man who'd saved him, mentored him, shaped him into who he was today. And Lorenzo had married her as part of a bet, had treated her like a pawn in his game against Enrico. The guilt sat heavy in his chest.
But more pressing was the tactical problem.
Someone had leaked Isabelle's identity to Enrico, which meant someone in his organization knew the truth.
Which meant they had a traitor.
Marco, Lorenzo called. His consigliere appeared immediately, looking exhausted from the night's battle. Those anonymous tips we've been getting, the ones about the mole in our organization, the corrupt dock workers, the police captain on Rossi's payroll.
Where did they come from?
Marco frowned.
Untraceable email accounts, burner phone.
We've been trying to identify the source for months, but whoever it is knows how to cover their tracks. Lorenzo thought of Isabelle's steady hands stitching his wounds, her intimate knowledge of his world, the way she'd handled herself at the gala with the precision of someone trained in social warfare. Don Valentino had been famous for his intelligence network, his ability to see 3 moves ahead.
Pull all the tips.
Cross-reference them with Isabelle's movements over the past 2 months. Understanding dawned on Marco's face.
You think she's the source?
I think, Lorenzo said slowly, that Don Valentino's daughter inherited more than just his eyes. The data came back within an hour. Every anonymous tip corresponded to a day when Isabelle had been seen leaving the mansion. supposedly for bakery supplies or to visit her mother. The correlation was undeniable. Lorenzo found her in the library, curled up in her favorite chair with a book she wasn't reading. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and she looked small in a way that made his chest ache. "We need to talk," he said. Isabelle set down the book, her face carefully blank.
About
the anonymous tips that have been saving my operation for the past 2 months. Lorenzo moved closer, watching her reaction.
About the intelligence that's been feeding me information on threats I didn't even know existed.
Isabelle's mask cracked slightly. "Lorenzo, it was you."
Not a question.
A statement. "You've been using your father's old network to protect me."
To watch my back while I was too proud to see it.
yes.
No point in denying it now. Isabelle stood, wrapping her arms around herself. "After we married, I started reaching out to Papa's old contacts. Men who still remembered him, who still honored his name." Her voice strengthened. "I couldn't just sit here and do nothing while you walked into danger."
So I built my own intelligence network, fed you information through channels you'd trust.
Lorenzo felt something twist in his chest, anger and admiration, and a fierce possessiveness all tangled together. "You've been protecting me."
All this time. Someone had to.
Isabelle's dark eyes flashed. "You're so busy watching everyone else, you forget to watch yourself. You trust your men too much, give them too much access." "Giuseppe," Lorenzo said, the pieces clicking into place.
The tip about Giuseppe's betrayal, that was you?
Yes.
"He was planning to sell you out to Enrico, giving him access to your security protocols. I found out through one of Papa's old bookkeepers who still kept tabs on the major families." Lorenzo moved to his desk, pulling out files.
The dock situation. The police captain.
"The warehouse raid that should have caught us but didn't."
All me, Isabelle confirmed.
"I've been tracking Enrico's movements, using Papa's connections to stay 2 steps ahead."
Why?
Lorenzo demanded, his voice rough.
Why risk yourself like that?
"This wasn't part of our deal." Because Isabelle's voice broke slightly. "Because somewhere between the courthouse and now this stopped being just a deal."
Because I couldn't stand the thought of you getting hurt.
"Because I'm in love with you, you stubborn, infuriating man." The confession hung in the air between them. Lorenzo stared at her, this woman who'd turned his carefully controlled world upside down. "You lied to me," he said finally.
About who you are, about what you've been doing.
I did.
Isabelle didn't flinch from the truth. "I deceived you from the moment we met. I won't apologize for protecting you, but I am sorry for the lies." Lorenzo crossed the space between them in 3 strides, grabbing her face between his hands.
You infuriating, brilliant woman.
"Do you have any idea how dangerous what you've been doing is?"
About as dangerous as marrying a mafia boss you've never met,
Isabelle shot back. "I could have protected you, I don't need you to protect me." Isabelle's voice rose, her Italian heritage showing through.
I need you to see me. Really see me.
Not as some helpless woman you married for a bet, not as a pawn to be moved around your chessboard.
Me.
Isabelle.
Don Valentino's daughter.
The woman who loves you enough to risk everything to keep you safe. Lorenzo kissed her hard and desperate and claiming. When they broke apart, both breathing heavily, his eyes were blazing.
I see you, he said roughly. God help me, I see you. And it terrifies me.
Why?
Because I love you too. The words came out like they'd been torn from him.
Because you're the one thing in my life I can't control, can't predict, can't live without. Because you've made me weak.
No.
Isabelle grabbed his shirt, pulling him closer. I've made you human.
There's a difference.
The library door burst open. Vito, one of Lorenzo's oldest capos, stood in the doorway, his weathered face pale as if he'd seen a ghost. Mia Dio, he whispered, staring at Isabelle.
Mia Valentino. Lorenzo's entire body tensed. Vito the Don's little goat.
Vito moved closer, his eyes never leaving Isabelle's face.
We all thought you were dead.
The car accident, your mother. He trailed off, decades of memories playing across his features. Isabelle stood frozen, recognizing the old man. He'd been one of her father's most trusted captains, had brought her candy when he came to their secret meetings. "Uncle Vito," she said softly, using the childhood name she'd called him.
The old man's eyes filled with tears. "You remember me? How could I forget?"
"You always smelled like anise and cigars." Vito laughed, the sound watery.
He turned to Lorenzo, his expression grave. "Boss, do you understand what this means?" "Who she is?"
"I'm beginning to," Lorenzo said quietly. "Don Valentino's only child." Vito's voice held reverence and warning. The rightful heir to his entire operation. His contacts, his territories, his legacy, all of it belongs to her by blood. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. He looked at Isabelle, seeing her in yet another new light. Not just his wife, not just the woman he loved, but a power in her own right.
A queen, not a pawn.
The old families would rally to her, Vito continued. If they knew she was alive, if she claimed her father's name. "I don't want his empire," Isabelle said firmly.
"I never have.
I just wanted to survive."
But it's yours by right," Vito pressed.
"Your father built something that could get me killed," Isabelle finished. "I know, Uncle Vito.
That's why I stayed hidden.
That's why I let everyone believe I died with my mother." Lorenzo's mind was racing, calculating possibilities and dangers. If the other families learned about Isabelle, they'd see her as either a threat or an opportunity. Either way, she'd become a target.
"How many others know?" he asked Vito.
"Just me, as far as I know. The others who knew the truth are mostly dead. Giuseppe, Antonio, maybe the old guard."
Vito's face hardened. "But if Rossi found out, others will too."
"The secret is already dying. Then we control the narrative," Lorenzo decided.
"We announce it ourselves on our term.
Make it clear that Isabelle is under my protection, that any move against her is a move against me." "That's putting a target on your back," Isabelle protested.
"There's already a target on my back."
Lorenzo pulled her close, his voice fierce. "But now anyone who wants to reach it has to go through Don Valentino's daughter. And from what I've seen, you're more dangerous than any of them realize." Vito smiled, seeing the dynamic between them. "The Don would have liked you, boss. He always said the strongest unions were between equals." He looked at Isabelle with grandfatherly affection. "Your father would be proud of the woman you've become, Piccola."
"You have his cunning, his strength."
"And his tendency to keep dangerous secrets," Lorenzo added dryly. "A family trait," Isabelle replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Vito excused himself, promising discretion and support. When they were alone again, Lorenzo pulled Isabelle back into his arms.
"No more secrets," he said.
"From this moment forward, we're partners. Equal partners."
"You want to use your father's network?"
Fine.
"But we do it together, with full transparency. Even though it goes against every instinct you have?" Isabelle challenged.
"Especially because of that."
Lorenzo cupped her face gently. "You've been right about everything so far. Maybe it's time I started trusting you completely." Isabelle's eyes searched his face. "This isn't what you signed up for. You wanted a simple bet, an easy win. Instead, you got me complicated, dangerous, carrying more baggage than a 747. "I wanted the waterfront," Lorenzo corrected. "I got an empire and a queen."
"I'd say I came out ahead."
"The bet," Isabelle said suddenly.
"Enrico, he must have found out who I am.
That's why he leaked it, why he attacked. He realized marrying me didn't make you look weak. It made you incredibly powerful."
Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "Which means he's going to escalate."
"He can't let me win now, the stakes are too high."
So what do we do?
"We end this."
Lorenzo's voice went cold. "We finish what Enrico started, permanently. But first,"
he pulled out his phone, texting rapidly. "We make sure you're protected. The full weight of my operation, plus your father's old guard.
No one touches you.
And you?" Isabelle grabbed his hand.
Who protects you?
Lorenzo smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut.
"You do, apparently."
"You've been doing it all along." They stood together in the library, surrounded by books and secrets, planning their next move. Outside, the sun was rising on a new chapter 1, where the bet that brought them together had transformed into something far more dangerous and real.
An alliance of blood and power.
A marriage of equals. A love forged in deception and violence and the desperate need to survive.
What time is it there?
Are you listening alone or late at night? Because what comes next, you're going to need to brace yourself. The attack came 3 nights later. Isabelle woke to the sound of explosions and screaming metal. The mansion's windows blew inward, showering her bed with glass. She rolled to the floor on instinct, her father's training kicking in even after all these years.
Stay low.
Find cover.
Assess the threat.
The emergency lighting pulsed red, painting the room in hellish colors. Isabelle grabbed clothes, pulling them on quickly. She could hear gunfire below, sustained, professional. This wasn't a probe or a warning. This was a full assault.
Her door burst open.
Lorenzo filled the frame, tactical vest over his shirt, gun in hand. Blood already streaked his face from a cut above his eyebrow.
Time to move,
he barked.
No.
Isabelle didn't argue. She followed him into the hallway, where chaos reigned. Lorenzo's men were engaged in firefights throughout the mansion, the crack of gunfire echoing off marble and steel. Bodies littered the floor, some Lorenzo's men, some attackers. The elegant fortress had become a battlefield.
How many?
Isabelle asked as they ran.
20, maybe 30.
Lorenzo fired twice over his shoulder, dropping an attacker who'd appeared behind them. Rossi emptied his entire crew for this. They reached the main staircase. Below, the foyer had turned into a war zone. Men fought hand to hand, the close quarters making guns useless. Lorenzo pulled Isabelle back, scanning for an alternate route.
The service stairs, Isabelle said, pointing.
They lead to the garage. Lorenzo looked at her sharply. How do you... I've been learning the escape route since I moved in.
Force of habit.
She grabbed his hand. This way. They ran through the mansion's hidden corridors, the sounds of battle muffled but constant. Isabelle led them with confidence, navigating passages that most of Lorenzo's own men didn't know existed. Behind them, explosions continued to rock the building. They burst into the garage to find Marco defending the vehicles, 3 dead attackers at his feet. He spun, gun raised, then lowered it when he saw Lorenzo. They're everywhere. They brought enough firepower to level the place.
The men?
Lorenzo demanded. Holding the main corridors, but we're outgunned. Marco's face was grim. They knew our defensive positions, knew where we'd be. Giuseppe, Lorenzo growled. He must have sold us out before we caught him.
Another explosion, closer this time.
The garage door buckled inward. They were running out of time.
The panic room in your office, Isabelle said.
We can coordinate from there, call in reinforcements.
We'll never make it back upstairs, Marco argued. Not the mansion's panic room.
Isabelle met Lorenzo's eyes. My father's panic room. The one built into the foundation of this house.
Lorenzo stared at her.
This was Don Valentino's house. Before you bought it.
Before he sold it to you, yes.
Isabelle moved to a seemingly solid wall, her fingers finding hidden catches. A section slid open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. He built this place as his primary safe house. Even after my mother left, he kept it maintained.
You've known about this the whole time? Lorenzo's voice was tight. Yes.
Isabelle descended the stairs without apologizing.
I'll explain later. Right now, we need to survive.
They followed her down into a tunnel that ran beneath the mansion's foundation. Emergency lights flickered to life as they moved, triggered by motion sensors. The tunnel was narrow but well maintained, the walls reinforced concrete.
How extensive is this?
Lorenzo asked, his tactical mind already working through possibilities. It connects to 3 exit points across the property. Isabelle moved confidently through the darkness. Plus a fully equipped command center my father built during the territory wars of the 90s. They emerged into a room that made Marco whistle low. Surveillance monitors covered one wall, showing feeds from cameras throughout the mansion and grounds. Weapons lined another wall. Communications equipment hummed quietly in the corner. "Cristo," Lorenzo breathed. "This is a fortress beneath your fortress." Isabelle finished. She moved to the surveillance monitors, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "And it's about to become our tactical advantage." Lorenzo watched her work, seeing yet another layer of the woman he'd married. This wasn't the scared bookshop owner, or even the sharp-witted society wife. This was Don Valentino's daughter, trained and prepared for exactly this moment. "There." Isabelle pointed to a monitor. "Rossi's men are concentrated in the north wing. They're trying to find us, assuming we're in the main panic room, which gives us an opening," Lorenzo said, moving beside her. His hand found the small of her back.
An unconscious gesture of connection. Marco used the tunnel system to flank.
Take them out in groups. What about you, boss?
Lorenzo's smile was cold as winter. "I'm going to call in our reinforcements. All of them." He picked up the secure phone, dialing rapidly. "And then I'm going to remind Enrico Rossi why you don't come after what's mine." The battle lasted until dawn. By the time the sun rose over the ruined mansion, bodies littered the grounds and the acrid smell of smoke hung heavy in the air. Lorenzo stood among the wreckage, his clothes torn and bloody, watching as his men secured the last of Rossi's soldiers. Enrico himself knelt in what remained of Lorenzo's foyer, hands zip-tied behind his back, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. Marco kept a gun trained on him while Lorenzo approached slowly, deliberately. "You destroyed my home," Lorenzo said conversationally, like they were discussing the weather. "Killed my men, tried to kill my wife." He crouched down, meeting Enrico's eyes. "That was a mistake. She's Don Valentino's daughter." Enrico spat blood. "You think marrying her makes you untouchable? It makes you a target. She makes me stronger." Lorenzo's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "Something you were too stupid to understand. You thought she was my weakness. You couldn't have been more wrong." Isabelle appeared in the doorway.
Stepping carefully over debris, she'd changed into
Appropriate clothes, her hair pulled back severely. In the harsh morning light, with determination etched into every line of her face, the resemblance to her father was unmistakable. Enrico's eyes widened. "Mia Valentino, the ghost." "Not a ghost," Isabelle said coldly. "Very much alive, and very much interested in why you thought attacking my husband was a good idea." "This was about the bet," Lorenzo said, understanding dawning. "You realized marrying Isabelle didn't embarrass me, it elevated me. Gave me access to Don Valentino's entire network." He laughed without humor. "You played yourself, Enrico. The waterfront." Enrico said desperately. "We can still negotiate. There's nothing to negotiate." Lorenzo stood, gesturing to Marco. "You lost the bet the moment you underestimated my wife. You lost everything the moment you attacked my home." He pulled out a sheaf of papers from his pocket. "Legal documents, transfer deeds.
signed and notarized. The waterfront.
Also mine, seized by my lawyers 3 hours ago while you were busy bleeding out in my driveway. Your contacts in the city government? They're very interested in the recordings I have of your more illegal activities." Enrico's face went pale. "You can't, I can. I did."
Lorenzo's smile was sharp.
"Enrico, you just didn't realize I was playing a completely different game. What happens to him?" Isabelle asked, her voice carefully neutral. Lorenzo looked at her, then at Enrico. "That's up to you." Isabelle moved closer, staring down at the man who'd tried to destroy them. She thought of her father, of the lessons he'd taught her about power and mercy, and the delicate balance between them. "Let him live," she said finally. "But take everything. His businesses, his properties, his reputation. Let him watch while we build an empire from the ashes of his ambition." She met Enrico's eyes. "My father always said the best revenge is
Success. Let's prove him right." Lorenzo's expression softened as he looked at her. "Mercy and vengeance. You are your father's."
Isabelle added quietly. "Which means I'm learning from the best." Lorenzo gave the order, Marco, and the others hauled Enrico away. leaving Lorenzo and Isabelle alone in the destroyed foyer. Sunlight streamed through the shattered windows, illuminating the devastation.
Your beautiful house, Isabelle said sadly. Just a house. Lorenzo pulled her against him, holding her tight. You're safe. That's all.
Isabelle corrected. Together, they stood there among the ruins, battered and exhausted and alive. Around them, Lorenzo's men began the work of securing the property and clearing the dead. But in that moment, there was only the two of them, two survivors who'd found something worth fighting for. The bet, Isabelle said suddenly. You won. The waterfront is yours. Ours, Lorenzo corrected. Everything I have is ours now. Partners, remember? Isabelle looked up at him, this dangerous man who'd somehow become her anchor, her home. What do we do now? Now. Lorenzo kissed her forehead gently. Now we rebuild. Better, stronger. Together. The boardroom of Raldi Enterprises gleamed with contemporary elegance, all glass and steel. Overlooking Manhattan's skyline, Isabelle stood at the head of the conference table, a sleek tablet in her hand, commanding the attention of 20 hardened businessmen and women who'd once been soldiers in her father's and Lorenzo's operations. The waterfront development is ahead of schedule, she said, her voice confident and authoritative. We've legitimized 70% of our former operations, converting them into profitable legal businesses. The shipping company alone has doubled its revenue this quarter. Lorenzo sat at her right hand, watching her with undisguised pride. His wife no longer hidden, no longer pretending to be anything other than what she was. Don Valentino's daughter. His equal partner. The woman who'd transformed his empire from the shadows into the light. The tech venture is our biggest success, Isabelle continued, pulling up charts on the display screen. By partnering with legitimate startups and providing capital, we've diversified our portfolio while creating distance from our previous business model. Antonio, one of the old guard, raised his hand. What about the families who still operate the old way? They're not happy about our shift. They don't have to be happy, Lorenzo interjected smoothly. They just have to understand that the world is changing. We change with it, or we die. Isabelle nodded. We're not abandoning our roots. We're evolving them. My father always said that real power comes from adaptation, from seeing 3 moves ahead. She clicked to a new slide. Which brings me to our next initiative, a foundation in Don Valentino's name, focused on youth programs in underserved communities. The room fell silent.
Vito, now serving as an advisor, smiled broadly.
The Don would have loved that. He would have, Isabelle agreed softly. He always believed in giving kids a better choice than he had. The meeting continued for another hour, covering logistics and strategies and growth projections. When it finally adjourned, the board members filed out, their respect for Isabelle evident in every gesture and word. She'd earned her place at the table not through Lorenzo's influence, but through her own intelligence and strength. When they were alone, Lorenzo pulled Isabelle into his arms. You're magnificent when you're being ruthless and strategic. I learned from the best, Isabelle replied, kissing him softly.
2 of the best, actually.
Lorenzo's hands settled on her waist, pulling her closer. Your father would be proud.
Of all of this, of who you've become.
He'd be proud of us, Isabelle corrected.
Of what we've built together.
The church was small, intimate, nothing like the cold courthouse where they'd first married late. Afternoon sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, painting the old wooden pews in jewel tones. Flowers overflowed from every surface, their scent sweet and alive. Isabelle stood in the small anteroom, adjusting her dress in the mirror. The gown was custom-made, designed to celebrate her curves rather than hide them, deep burgundy silk that made her skin glow and her dark hair shine. She wore her father's signet ring on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath the dress.
A secret connection to her past.
Bella, Maria, the housekeeper who'd become her closest confidant, dabbed at her eyes. You look like a queen. I feel like myself, Isabelle said softly.
Finally.
The door opened. Vito stood there in his formal suit, tears already tracking down his weathered cheeks. Your father would have wanted to walk you down the aisle.
Since he can't,
He offered his arm. Would you honor an old man? Isabelle's own eyes filled. Uncle Vito, I can't think of anyone I'd rather have. The music began, not a traditional wedding march, but something richer, more personal, Isabelle. And Vito walked down the short aisle together, past the gathered witnesses. Lorenzo's most trusted the men remnants of her father's old guard. The small family they'd built from violence and loyalty and blood. Lorenzo stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored suit, but his eyes held everything: love, desire, promise, future when. Isabelle reached him. Vito placed her hand in Lorenzo's and stepped back, his duty fulfilled. We're already married, the priest said with a gentle smile. But today isn't about legalities.
It's about choice.
About choosing each other freely and completely. Lorenzo's hand tightened on Isabelle's. When I first met you, I thought I was making a business transaction. I thought I was so smart, so in control. His voice roughened. I was an idiot. You weren't a transaction, you were a revolution. You turned my entire world upside down, forced me to feel things I'd buried for decades. Isabelle's thumb traced circles on his palm, encouraging him to continue. I married you to win a bet, Lorenzo said, his eyes never leaving hers. I kept you because I couldn't imagine letting you go. I fell in love with you because you showed me what it means to be strong and soft at the same time. You made me human again, Isabelle. You made me whole. Isabelle took a shaky breath, her own vows ready. I married you because I was desperate and scared. I lied to you about who I was, used you for protection, manipulated you into this arrangement. She smiled through her tears. And then you did the most unexpected thing. You saw me.
Really saw me.
Not the daughter of Don Valentino, not the fat girl people dismissed, not the quiet bookshop owner. Just me.
Lorenzo's eyes glistened.
You gave me a home, Isabelle continued. Not this mansion, not the empire, you. You became my home. The place where I can be completely myself, where I'm safe to be vulnerable and strong, broken and healing. Her voice strengthened. I choose you, Lorenzo Raldi. Today and every day. Not because of a contract, but because I love you with everything I am. The priest cleared his throat emotionally. Then, by the power vested in me, and with the blessing of everyone gathered here, I pronounce you still married, but now truly united.
You may kiss your wife. Again.
Lorenzo pulled Isabelle against him, kissing her with a tenderness that made several of the gathered men clear their throats and look away. This kiss was different from all the others. It held promise and permanence, the sealing of a bond forged in fire and blood and unexpected love. When they finally broke apart, the small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. Isabelle laughed, burying her face in Lorenzo's shoulder, overwhelmed by happiness she'd never expected to feel. As they walked back down the aisle together, truly together this time, Lorenzo leaned close to whisper in her ear. Ready to build our empire, Mrs. Raldi? Isabelle squeezed his hand.
With you? Always.
The reception was held at the newly restored mansion, rebuilt from the attack's ashes into something even more beautiful than before the bee. Formal gardens were strung with lights, tables overflowing with food and wine and laughter. Music drifted through the warm evening air. But Isabelle and Lorenzo stood apart from the celebration, on the balcony of their private quarters, watching their people enjoy the night. Their fingers were intertwined, their bodies pressed close together. Do you ever regret it? Isabelle asked softly. The bet, the marriage, all of it. Lorenzo turned her in his arms so she faced him, the lights from the garden casting a warm glow across her face. I regret treating you as anything less than what you are from the beginning. I regret the pain I caused you with my arrogance. His hand cupped her cheek. But regret marrying you?
Never.
You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Isabelle.
Even if you did lie about everything.
Isabelle laughed. I prefer to think of it as strategic omission. Just like your father, Lorenzo said, but his tone was affectionate. Speaking of which, he pulled a small box from his pocket.
I found this in the safe beneath the house.
Don Valentino's wedding ring. I thought maybe you'd want it. Isabelle's breath caught. The ring gleamed in the low light, simple gold, worn smooth with age. Her father's ring. She'd thought it lost forever. How did you? He left instructions, Lorenzo explained.
Hidden in the command center.
A letter, actually. For whoever married his daughter. He smiled. He knew you'd only marry someone strong enough to find his secrets.
What did it say?
Isabelle whispered. That I better protect you with my life. That if I ever made you cry, he'd haunt me from the grave. That he trusted you to choose wisely. And therefore I must be worth something.
Lorenzo's voice softened.
And that he was proud of you. That he always knew you'd be stronger than him. Tears streamed down Isabelle's face. Lorenzo wiped them away gently, then slipped the ring onto her thumb. It was too large for her other fingers. A connection to her father, to her past, to the legacy she carried.
Thank you.
She managed.
Anything for you, Lorenzo said simply. Everything for you. Below, someone had started a traditional Italian folk song. Their people, the old guard and the new the soldiers turned businessmen, the women who'd survived alongside them joined in, their voices rising in harmony.
We should go down, Isabelle said.
It's our party. In a minute. Lorenzo pulled her closer, swaying slightly to the distant music. Right now, I just want to hold my wife and think about how I married her to win a bet. Kept her because I was falling in love, and now can't imagine a single day without her. Isabelle tilted her head up, her eyes searching his face. You wanted someone undesirable.
You got a queen.
I got everything, Lorenzo corrected, kissing her softly.
I got you.
They stood there on the balcony, wrapped in each other's arms, while their empire celebrated below. Two survivors who'd found love in the most unlikely place. Two players who'd transformed a cruel bet into an unbreakable bond. Bet that had brought them together was long forgotten. What remained was real, messy and complicated and absolutely perfect, a partnership built on truth, tested by fire, and sealed with a love neither had expected but both desperately needed. Lorenzo looked at his wife, Don Valentino's daughter, his equal, his salvation, and knew that he'd won far more than any bet could ever offer. He'd won her heart, her trust, her future.
And she'd won.
Together, they would build an empire that honored the past while embracing the future. Together, they were unstoppable. Ti amo, Lorenzo whispered against her hair.
Always.
Always, Isabelle echoed, her heart full.
Forever.
The music swelled. The stars glittered overhead. And in that perfect moment, everything that had seemed broken was finally, beautifully whole. If you made it this far, you're part of the family. Hit subscribe, you won't want to miss what comes next. This is Best Heart Stories, where every ending is just a new beginning.
Until next time.